See, guys, two-parters aren't that bad. Okay, I am so sorry for the wait, but we are finally here. Okay, let's get into this. No more wasting of time. Yes, taking into account not only the people's love for Queen Aura, but also the mutual disdain for the new monarch, Estelena's coronation wasn't seen as rightful by them. It was the first to be completely closed off to small folk since the times of Queen Celia, and in addition to being received with vocal criticism and heckling by those who still saw Aura as their lady. Estelena finally married Vulture in the Great Celestum 1 week after being crowned, an equally as luxurious and lavish event where the queen was said to have never stopped grinning, a rare sight in the years to come. Estelena's first action as queen was to replace the old council with new members, who wouldn't attempt to sabotage her greatness. In her own words. However, thanks to Vulture, her relationship with her new ministers, whom the king picked himself, wasn't already on the best terms, with Estelena often having petty arguments with the other lords and ladies regarding her immoral reign policies. It's something that still puzzles historians nowadays. How could such a promising princess evolve into such a ruinous leader? Half are of the opinion that Estelena never had the talent for governing to begin with, merely acting under Vulture's instructions to give that impression. The others, meanwhile, point to Estelena going against her ministers solely as a means to exact herself as the queen, to celebrate her victory over her mother by proving she was now the one who had the final word and was really in charge of the kingdom. Whatever the answer is, we may never know. In any case, if Aura's reign had been turned for others, Estelena's was aimed at herself, not caring about her subjects in the very least. Not only did she cut off the majority of the programs introduced by her mother to finance her own expenses in the first few months of her rule, she also repurposed the homeless shelters to house her precious imported goods, where most of the yearly budget now went to. Furthermore, in a half-baked attempt to fix the social imbalance it caused and put things back the way they were, Estelena ordered the deportation of any family or citizen living in Butterfly for less than 20 years, considering them as a waste of time and resources that could be better purposed into other ends. I am so sorry for my stuttering. I'm sorry. These other ends became clear in an interesting description by Lord Macaw Redbird, detailing Estelena's behavior as Queen Butterfly. As written in a personal document, Her Majesty behaves more like a socialite than a queen. Her wardrobe, filled with sumptuous imported dresses and ostentatious jewelry, is only overshadowed by the ludicrous amount of gold statues and oil paintings she spreads around the castle. She constantly throws lavish parties, seemingly wanting to fall on our good graces, so will continue funding her Capricorn's vices. Yeah, right. If anything, it seems like what she craves most is the attention and recognition, as if she wants to prove something to us, or herself. When not berating us in the council meetings, sipping sylvan wine or mistreating servants, he's constantly looking for King Vulture. But I say if he knows what's good for himself, he'll stay far away from her. And that Vulture did. It quickly became obvious to the outside world that Vulture had married Estelena solely to manipulate her decisions and effectively rule the kingdom himself. However, it's believed that after seeing Estelena's imprudence and negligent way of ruling, Vulture would have deemed her a lost cause, too damaged and volatile to be useful, deciding to adopt a new strategy. As established above, Estelena was an overconfident queen who refused to take advice from her ministers and only listened to her king. Vulture took advantage of this to convince her that they were a team, encouraging Estelena to go out and enjoy life, while leaving the office duties to him, something Estelena happily complied with by delving deeper into her galas. From as early as 1170, Vulture had been the one who represented the queen in most of the meetings and handled practically all of the actual governing, with Estelena not seeing it as anything more than her husband wanting the best for her. Yet this also meant that Vulture had spent little attention and care to his wife, which led Estelena to grow increasingly tense and anxious over time. It's often speculated that the king actively worked to ignore Estelena now that he had what he wanted, only acknowledging her existence when he needed something from her or to fill his marital duty, as the relationship had become completely one-sided. While Estelena initially attributed Vulture's lack of interest to tiredness from work, her insecurities eventually led her to blame herself for thinking that she'd done something to upset her husband. Feeling worthless and despising herself for being unable to please Vulture, Estelena was taken into a deep depressive state, consequently becoming an almost unrecognizable figure in the process. Noticeably thinner, she stopped wearing her colorful, extravagant dresses, instead sticking to simple, dull ones. Discarding any makeup and jewelry, ate very little, at times being forced to, often overindulged in wine, and always wore an empty, void expression. Even her hair seems to have lost its usual volume, according to some reports. She was stripped of any trace of her former arrogance, battered down into trance-like indifference to the world around her, as she roamed the halls aimlessly looking for a purpose, detached from reality and neglecting her duties, which in turn only gave Vulture more power within the court. Her balls became but an obvious cry for help to get the adoration and stardom she so desperately required. She is a shell of her former self, a star devoid of any light, gazing at the world with a jaded and numb look, a broken smile, almost like a phantom, Lady Laney Banner once described. The only thing that was able to temporarily bring back some life into Estelena were Vulture's mentions of donations from the Maple Kingdom on her mother's part, who had heard of her latest expenses and wanted to make sure the ones she loved had everything they needed, as Aura wrote in them. While Estelena often pondered about her choice to cut them from her life, receiving her mother's checks would openly reignite her spitefulness towards her remaining family. She was secretly hurt by the fact that her mother had seemingly contacted her the first time only to care about someone else, ignoring the pile of unopened letters Vulture secretly kept hidden under their bed. In addition to being exasperated that Aura still cared more about her subjects than her own daughter, and didn't trust her enough to rule without interfering. As such, Estelena herself would send the money back every time, only of the few actions Vulture still allowed her to do. However, Estelena's ingrate response to the help she was offered by the Maple wasn't exactly well seen by the neighboring kingdoms, who were quick to censor the queen's ego and inability to think of what was best for her realm. Ever prideful, Estelena refused to apologize, and despite House Banner's best efforts to conciliate the situation, it led to the straining of their political relations and Butterfly's first absences from international events in the Dark Ages. As a consequence, the Butterfly Kingdom, as did Estelena, grew increasingly isolated from the outside world, with the internal situation becoming direr by the day. Socially, it had been as if her mother's reign had never taken place. Conditions reverted to being as precarious and chaotic that employment rates and productivity were greatly impacted. Not to mention the classism and elitism that was beginning to take root in the streets, separating those tolerated by the queen. And economically, not even taking into account the reduction of trade following the estrangement of the butterflies of the kingdom's alliances after only half a decade of reign and reckless unnecessary expenses. The kingdom's vault and the money bin were almost shriveled, completely erasing the cushion created by Thea the Wealthy and putting the realm at serious risk of another financial crisis. Likely realizing this, Estelena desperately attempted to sell to the Phantom Isles to recover some stability, but had no luck. She panicked and handed the wheel back to Vulture, moping and feeling sorry for herself. Needless to say, Vulture was furious with Estelena's actions, or more importantly, with what they had cost him. It only worsened his cold shoulder and mistreatment of Estelena, now openly insulting her in front of the court, except when it came time to attempt to conceive an heiress. Widespread rumors claimed that Estelena had secretly been drinking Blue Moon tea to delay the pregnancy and win her husband's affection for longer. The same whispers say that she would have stopped when she considered that perhaps bearing him a child would win her Vulture's forgiveness. However, their veracity remains inconclusive, the only thing known for certain being the announcement of Estelena's pregnancy in 1172. In 1173, Estelena gave birth to her heiress, Princess Hyperia, a red-headed girl with tiaras for cheek marks. However, no sooner had Estelena recuperated than Vulture had gone back to ignoring her, a very notorious contrast to the amount of attention he now gave to the newborn princess. In her diary, Queen Estelena even admits that she had been slightly jealous of her daughter for this reason, in turn only feeling worse about herself. As Estelena sank deeper into her depression, she would often be seen looking out her window, sipping a glass of wine, seemingly lost in her thoughts. These moments made Estelena an easy target for any attack, such as the one that took place at the end of that year, when a cloaked figure approached from behind her and attempted to slit her throat. The queen had been saved at the last moment by the least likely of heroes, who drove away the attacker. It was someone she had trouble recognizing at first, not only due to the knight's helm covering his eyes, but also due to the stronger, more sculpted build, as Estelena described in her journal. Scottish fields. Out of instinct, Estelena threw herself into Scott's arms, embracing the one she had not seen for over 20 years, and thought he would never do again. However, she then remembered where they stood and had left off, immediately recomposing herself as she stepped away and dryly thanked him for his services. What could have been a heartfelt reunion was unfortunately cut short when Estelena learned that Scott's life-saving return had been but a happy coincidence. His presence was in fact due to another grimmer reason, the death of her mother. As Estelena sat down struggling to make sense of the news, Scott revealed he had been sent by her father, Spruce Forest, who upon being unable to breach his banishment and contact her through letters, which Estelena indignantly swore she never received, decided to send the now knight to inform her daughter in person. Moreover, he also came bearing the message that Spruce wished to see her, especially after the mysterious disappearance of her siblings, and Estelena now being all he had left. News of her mother's death spread like wildfire through the surrounding realms, eventually breaching the Butterfly Kingdom's walls and causing a large outcry that demanded Queen Aura's body be rightfully buried among the other old queens. In actuality, Estelena had already sent for her mother's coffin long before the clamour began, either being convinced by Scott or by her own will. She only pretended to listen to her people in a feeble attempt to improve her public image. The funeral rites took place a month later, popularly known as the Fortnight of Light, due to the thousands of candles lit in each window mourning of their queen. What no one knows is that in the darkness of the crypts, a single flame burnt as Estelena cried by her mother's coffin alone, deeply apologizing for everything she had done to her and the pain she had caused. It's logical to assume that Estelena finally rethought her behavior upon seemingly regretting her wrongs, but this was far from the case, and for this there are two reasons. The first came after Estelena told Vulture about the attempt on her life, combined with being overwhelmed by her mother's death and realization of the impact Aura truly had on her people's lives. Estelena confessed she saw both events as a wake-up call, even mentioning she wanted to meet with her father and reconnect with him. Yet before she could finish her sentence, she was pulled into a deep kiss by Vulture. "I'm just beyond relieved you survived," he told her as he placed his finger on her lip, interrupting Estelena's train of thought as she rejoiced with the touch and concern of Vulture. She so longed. What could have been an important moment of clarity for Estelena was stopped in his tracks by King Vulture, who realized this and worked to strengthen his hold on his wife by reining the passion in their marriage, leading her on for a few months until the danger had passed. To seal the deal, he also planted in her mind the idea that the peasants had been the ones who orchestrated the attempt, completely extinguishing any will the queen had to go back on her policies and reinstate what her mother had fought for. The second took place on the day of Estelena's supposed meeting with her father. After making her way to the forestal border near Forest Watchtower at the same time given to her by Scott, Estelena waited for hours, but Spruce never came. Bitter that she had once again been tricked by someone she once loved and thinking she was cared for, Estelena left the scene in a quiet, tearful rage, unaware of the body of a green-haired man laying behind the thick bushes with a dozen arrows stuck behind his back, each carrying King Vulture's seal. Back more hateful than ever, Estelena discarded any idea of changing. It seemed that Vulture's guesses were legitimate, as the following year saw hundreds of more attempts on Estelena's life, apparently stemming from her re-established mistreatment of her servants. With each attack, the queen wrongfully blamed and punished her people by purposefully raising their taxes, followed by throwing a lavish party to celebrate her survival using said funds. She once even replied, "Let them eat cake," as someone complained about the peasants' growing mistreatment and lack of basic necessities, such as bread. At the time, it was common to hear the rumors that these galas were also Estelena's way of taking her anger that Vulture was once again ignoring her, out on the small folk, but there is no evidence to back them up. At any rate, as she grew more paranoid and suspicious of the people around her, constantly listening for whispers in her name, Estelena made known a law that greatly rewarded those with any information on possible conspiracies against Her Majesty's life. It gave rise to a sort of witch hunt among her people, its effects shown through the increasing number of foul punishments that took place in the cut of years 1174 and the cut of years of 1174 to 1183. Regardless, Estelena's attempted murders were always thwarted by Scott, who had stuck around for reasons the queen didn't know but was secretly thankful for. In time, he was given the position of the queen's personal guard and offered a place to stay at the castle, bringing the two together on a daily basis and leading to the rekindling of their friendship, often bantering between the two as he saved her from knives, arrows, and even falling chandeliers. Another consequence of Estelena's constant assassination plot had been King Vulture sending Princess Hyperia away to the safety of the Great Celestum and its Cadentines in early 1175. Estelena wasn't even given the chance to say goodbye to her daughter or notified of her departure until after she was gone, being advised by Vulture to refrain from contacting her unless she wanted to endanger Hyperia's life. We then arrive at the year 1183. As she prepared to go to sleep one night, Estelena saw Vulture leading aquamarine stone into the royal bedchambers. Checking to see if he hadn't been followed before locking the door. Suspicious, Estelena leaned in closer to the door for an explanation, but instead only heard the mistakable sounds of what she deeply wished wasn't true. Vulture was an unfaithful king. To make matters worse, as she asked/demanded a nearby maid for more information, Estelena learned that Aquamarine was far from being the first woman Vulture had brought onto their bed, his infidelity being apparently an already known issue by everyone at the castle but her. Knowing nowhere else to go, Estelena ran to Scott's quarters as her world shattered around her, where in his lap she broke down in tears, once again doubting herself, her worth, and blaming herself for not being able to secure her husband. However, before she could drown in another whirlpool of insecurities, she was stopped by Scott, who looked her in the eyes and reminded her that she mattered and had more value than she would ever know. Never let anyone make you doubt that, he told her as they embraced. Only then did Estelena finally break free of Vulture's spell. Surely that means Estelena finally realizes her errors and changes for the better, you must be thinking. Well, not exactly. While seeing Vulture, she did open her eyes to what she had been blind to, or didn't want to see, since her youth, namely his wanton manipulation and unscrupulous usage of her solely to gain more power. Estelena only saw red, and thought of redemption she possibly had was completely overshadowed. Any thought of redemption she could possibly have was completely overshadowed by her rage. God, I'm so terrible at this. Resentful at the fact that she had been but a pawn in his game, and above all, heartbroken that she was never truly loved, Estelena completely turned on Vulture, garnering a thirst for vengeance and urged to repay him in the same coin. How would she accomplish this? Immaturely, in true Estelena fashion. She begged Scott to pretend to have an affair with her to get back at Vulture, and while at first the man was appalled by the question, he saw Estelena's eyes gleaming with pain and desperation, eventually accepting for fearing she would ask someone far less trustworthy if he declined. From that moment on, Estelena shamelessly paraded around her newest lover, having every intent to make sure Vulture knew of her extramarital affair. If Vulture had been bothered by it, it's hard to say. It's most likely that he simply didn't care. The only change occurring in his behavior being that he also stopped hiding his affairs. At most, he was annoyed at the fact that Estelena no longer listened to anything he told her, with the Queen in fact doing everything in her power to contradict his will. However, as time went on, Estelena began losing track of what was real and what was not. What had begun as a superficial tactic meant to hurt someone else quickly evolved into a meaningful connection. Especially with Scott still saving her life every other day, or every time that Estelena had exaggeratedly locked herself in a closet with Scott, she had incredibly deep conversations with her beloved, only growing closer to him. She began to question if the feelings she was pretending to have could actually be genuine, eventually realizing she had fallen in love with Scott. Had she not already from the first time he saved her? Her turning point came after she was poisoned in the winter of 1183, with Scott being the only one who never left her side and looked after Estelena until she recovered. I now see what love truly means. To be there for someone, in sickness and in health. To love their tiny imperfections and accept their mistakes. You breathe together, as opposed to needing them to breathe yourself. I can't do this to Scott. I can't take away his chance of feeling this way. He deserves to be happy, way more than I do. She confessed in her diary. Estelena decided to confront Scott about it in spring of 1184, revealing her feelings for him, while joking that he was way better at faking them than herself. It was then that Scott surprised her by replying he didn't know what she was talking about, adding that he never had to pretend anything. It all made sense on that moment. The reason Scott had never left, the reason he kept being by her side no matter what, no matter how she treated him, it had all been to protect the one most precious to him, the one he had loved since they were children. Their relationship became officially unofficial on that day, and for the first time in years, Estelena looked forward to what the future held. Estelena kept her affair with Scott the following years, though now being far less overt about it, and wishing she had kept it a secret from the beginning. She had genuinely found some freedom and relief in her nights, an escapism from her sadness and reason to be happy in spite of her crumbling life. Was it now that Estelena finally saw the error of her ways and turned over a new leaf? Hey, who is telling the story here? While it was undeniable that Scott was having a positive influence on Estelena, who threw less insults at her maids and gave a few smiles to her ministers, did not change overnight. Moreover, she was more focused on getting back with what Vulture had taken from her. Slowly removing his influence and reassuming her duties as the attempts to her life ended, life became more frequent, though nothing Scott couldn't handle. And that brings us to the fateful year of 1187, and discovery that Estelena was expecting another child. Knowing the baby could not be Vulture's for obvious reasons, Estelena confided these news only in Scott and attempted to hide her symptoms from her husband and the remaining court for the time being, fearing a scandal. However, as months passed and Estelena's belly began to show, it became impossible for her to conceal her pregnancy, with King Vulture becoming aware of it weeks after Princess Hyperia returned from the Great Celeste in preparation for her upcoming 14th birthday. It led to a ferocious altercation between the royal couple, where amid his anger outburst, Estelena learned the full extent of Vulture's plan. Not only had he been the one responsible for her father's death and her siblings' disappearances one by one, Vulture had also been the one who constantly ordered the hits on Estelena's life. Also, there would be no other pretenders to the throne, and he could be free to continue manipulating their daughter, reigning through Hyperia as his puppet, without Estelena there to prevent it. The argument turned violent when, after calling him a monster, Vulture slapped her and shoved Estelena onto their bed, grabbing a pillow as he replied, "Not yet," and declared, "I reckon if you want something done right, you better do it yourself." He then attempted to suffocate the queen until he was stopped by Scott, who had rushed to their room after hearing the sounds of the struggle and immediately launched himself at Vulture as a vicious brawl erupted between the two men. It ultimately cost King Vulture his life and left Scott mortally wounded. His last words reinforcing his love for Estelena, whilst telling her that he still had faith she could become someone better, the person he and her family had always seen her for. As Scott succumbed to his injuries, Estelena hopelessly wailed by her lover's body, in her agony failing to realize Princess Hyperia was standing behind her, her eyes wide with burning rage. The deaths were presented as accidents resulting from excessive drinking due to prevent a full-blown scandal, which, although the nobility was skeptical about, especially given their suspicions that Estelena had been carrying an illegitimate child, pretended to believe out of respect for the queen. For days, Scott's last words echoed in Estelena's head, only reminding her of the way she felt after her mother's death, at last realizing she had been her own worst enemy all along, and questioning what example she would be setting for her daughter and future generations. Estelena had her moment of clarity, determined to at least try to undo her wrongs and atone for her mistakes. In the last recorded entry of her diary, she confides, "I have no one to blame for my downfall, myself. But if Scott never gave up on me, then that must mean I still have time. I can still salvage my reign. I can still be a good mother and queen to my people and ministers. Like he and mother always believed in me, I can still make them proud. I won't let my past mistakes define who I am. Not anymore." Unfortunately, it was too little, too late. It's factually proven that Estelena had indeed worked alongside her ministers in order to create countermeasures for her own previous policies, but was never given the chance to implement them. Why? Well, a little over a fortnight after handing the royal wand to Hyperia, Estelena was in the royal office when she was surprised by her daughter and a dozen spearmen bursting through the door, announcing they were there to liberate Muni, with Hyperia going as far as calling her mother a moth and traitor. She demanded Estelena flee the realm immediately and give up the throne, something which the queen found amusing and laughed at first. However, upon seeing Hyperia's unyielding look and her wand surging with power, firmly pointed at her belly, Estelena realized the seriousness of the situation. As she was backed into a corner, Estelena attempted to dissuade her daughter, her success being evident by Hyperia opening fire on her. Not having enough magical powers to stand on her own against the wand-wielding princess, and barely avoiding her unforgiving shots, Estelena was thus forced to leave the scene. Heavily pregnant, she ran from the castle and the kingdom as a battalion of guards relentlessly chased after her, never to be seen again. Much like with her mother, the information that follows Estelena's overthrowing is limited. It's known that she would have found temporary shelter in a nearby village where she gave birth to her baby in Corn of 1187, a girl with purple hair, yellow eyes, and inverted crowns on her cheeks, she named Luminia. From the study of later letters from Lady Luminia, scholars are able to get a picture of what Estelena's last years looked like, despite the lack of official records. Constantly chased, Estelena ran from town to town, kingdom to kingdom, being often recognized by many of their inhabitants, but refused any assistance due to her infamy. Left in misery, she had nothing but the torn clothes on her body and a daughter to look after. Estelena had no choice but to turn to Mothism in order to provide for Luminia, and keep her warm and fed, sometimes even restraining from eating so her daughter wouldn't be hungry. In a way, Estelena found her redemption by attempting to raise Luminia to be someone better than herself, whom Aura and Scott would be proud of. The same kind of person they knew Estelena could be but never showed. Estelena Butterfly died in 1201, falling victim to a venereal disease caused by years of bad hygiene. Her body had been found by one of Hyperia's assassins, with Luminia lying by her side. However, unable to take the life of the girl like he had been ordered to, the man told Luminia to run away as far as he took Estelena's body back to the Butterfly Kingdom. Estelena's remains were ceremoniously thrown into the traitor's ditch by Queen Hyperia, where they would remain until the reign of her granddaughter Tempesta. Only then was she finally put to rest among her ancestors in the royal crypts and given a proper funeral. Hardly anyone mourned for the star of downfall, the misguided soul that paved the way for the terrible years that were ahead, and wouldn't forever be remembered for such. Estelena during one of her balls in 1171. Ending, kids, but remember, don't be an Estelena. If something bad in your life, you have a toxic trait or anything bad or anything horrible that you're doing to someone, end it. Because you don't know when these things like this could happen to you. And you don't know when your chances could run out to make good with your life. So please, just try to be positive and try to be a better person overall. I really love this biography, and on to Hyperia.